I ran away from my own wedding, not because I'd stopped loving the groom, but because he was the man my family had chosen to destroy me. That night, I hid in the limousine of the most feared mob boss in Philadelphia. I thought I'd climbed into a monster's car, but Augusto Castiglione was the first man who didn't try to possess me. He protected me. He teased me. He made me crave danger. And just when I was finally starting to feel free, the man I left behind came back determined to take me by force. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, The Night the Rain Chose for Me. The veil weighed on me as if it had been stitched together with nails. Look, my Aunt Renata kept repeating, adjusting the fabric behind my neck with thin fingers that smelled of old perfume. That's what this dress means, Veronica. The luck of an entire family hanging from your neck. I smiled because it was what was expected of me, and the smile came out exactly like the one I'd been practicing in the mirror since I was 12. Small, polite, empty enough to reveal nothing of what was burning inside me. "Could you get me a glass of water?" I asked, and my voice came out weaker than I wanted. "In a bit. Don't ruin your makeup." The ceremony's antechamber smelled of church wax and 2 white lilies, the kind my father chose when he wanted to impress allies. Through the half-open door I could hear the murmur of the guests. Men in dark suits, women wearing too visible jewelry, an orchestra rehearsing a waltz no one would dance. That was how the Belluccis celebrated, as if a wedding were a contract sung in Latin, and I was the signature. I looked at my hands. The heavy rings my father had ordered placed on me gleamed on the ring finger of my right hand. My hands, still bare of any wedding band, trembled despite my effort to keep them still over the tulle. "Where's Olindo?" my aunt asked, distracted, turning toward the door. The answer came from inside, in a heavy step I'd already learned to recognize by the sound of his shoes on the marble. "Right here, dear aunt." Olindo Valeri walked in without knocking. That was his privilege now. The tuxedo sat badly on his broad shoulders, and his hair, which he insisted on slicking back with too much gel, left his forehead exposed like a threat. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. It was 9 in the evening. "Veronica." He looked me up and down as if I were a storefront display. "They managed to hide the exhaustion. I was afraid your face would ruin the photo." My aunt laughed. That laugh the women in my family used to hide their terror. "Olindo, you're shameless." "I'm an honest man." He came closer. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and a too expensive cologne hit my nose before he spoke. "Smile more, woman. You've got the rest of your life to be in a bad mood with me." His hand found my waist. It wasn't a touch. It was a marking, a warning. The kind of gesture men like him used to remind you whom you belong to. His fingers squeezed a little too hard. I felt the tool give. I felt the skin beneath the tool give too. My aunt looked away. "I need to go to the bathroom," I said, and this time my voice didn't tremble, because the fear had turned into something else. "Make it quick." Olindo raised his glass. "The night is ours, Cara." I left through the side door with the measured step of someone still pretending. I crossed the hallway where 2 attendants whispered. I smiled at a maid carrying a tray of glasses. I remembered her name, Cecilia, and asked if her mother was doing better. She nearly dropped the glasses from surprise. It was the last polite thing I did that night. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that led to the service area. I knew this because ever since I was a child, I'd hidden in that part of the house whenever my father shouted at someone in his office. I pushed. It gave. I crossed the cement courtyard without looking back. Went through the back gate with the dress brushing the dirty ground, and when the cold Philadelphia air hit my face, I understood that I'd decided before I even knew it. The rain had already begun. I started running down the uneven cobblestone street, my heel sinking between the wet joints. The dress grew heavier and heavier, and I held the hem with both hands to keep moving forward. I passed one corner, then another. A siren wailed in the distance. A window opened above me and shut again. No one looked at the woman running in a veil through the rain, because in Philadelphia, no one looks at anything after 9. On a street behind my father's house, my heel finally gave out. I tripped, scraped my knee on the asphalt, got up without breathing. I took off the shoe, threw away the other. I kept going barefoot. The stones cut into me. It didn't matter. Behind me, distant but coming closer, I heard his voice. "Veronica! Veronica! You crazy woman! Get back here now!" Olindo shouted like a man who didn't yet know he'd been humiliated. I knew. I just invented it. I turned left onto a narrower street, where the old buildings cast double shadows over the asphalt. That was where I saw the facade of the Hotel Whitlock, with those 2 round lanterns above the entrance. And that was where I saw the limousine. Black, long, parked at the edge of the sidewalk with its engine off. Rain ran down the hood, but even in the darkness I recognized the crest, 2 crossed swords beneath a small crown, engraved in matte metal on the front door. I'd seen that design once, on a ring, on the hand of a man who'd been in my father's office. My father had sent me out of the room before greeting him. He'd sent me out in a low voice, the voice he only used when he was truly afraid. That was Augusto Castiglione's car. In the side mirror, I also saw the driver's face, the same one I'd recognized from an old visit to my father's house, his chin resting on his hand, as if waiting were part of the salary. The same man who'd once waited on my home's porch while Castiglione argued with my father behind closed doors. I remembered him because, during that visit, he'd asked a maid for water and thanked her by name, a rare gesture in our world. In that world, it was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. The decision wasn't a thought. It was an animal's calculation. If I ran 1 more block, Olindo would catch me. If I went into a store, someone from the family would be there within half an hour. But if I hid exactly where no one would expect, inside the car of the one man my father secretly feared, then maybe, just maybe, I'd have 1 more hour of life. I crossed the street barefoot, soaked, and pulled the handle of the back door. It gave. I got in, shut it without a sound, and threw myself onto the floor between the leather seats. The dress stuck to the dark carpet. I tucked my legs under my body, wrapped my arms around my knees, held the air in my lungs. The smell inside the car was of new leather, of cedar, of a woody perfume that didn't yet have a name in my vocabulary. Outside, Olindo's voice ran past. It passed. It vanished around the corner. I closed my eyes. I counted to 10, to 20, to 100. I tried to think of a plan for afterward, but afterward was a hole. I had no money, no ID, no shoes. I had a wedding dress glued to my skin and a certainty that going home was worse than anything that could happen here. That was when the hotel door opened. I heard the footsteps first, heavy, unhurried. A single pair. Whoever walked like that knew the world would wait. Whoever walked like that didn't even run from the rain. Tobiah, the driver, rolled down the front window. "Good evening, sir. Let's go." It was the first time I heard Augusto Castiglione's voice, and it didn't match what I'd imagined. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was low, calm, slightly hoarse. The kind that makes the person beside you stop talking without understanding why. The back door opened. I didn't breathe. He got in and shut the door behind him with a dry click. He sat. From that absurd angle, on the floor between the seats, I could see polished black shoes, the impeccable hem of dark trousers, and nothing more. The car began to move. The rain beat against the glass. For 3 seconds I truly believed I'd made it. Then he spoke again. "Tobiah, pull over as soon as we're off the avenue." "Yes, sir." There was a pause. No, it wasn't a pause. It was a silence with weight, the kind that settles in your chest before the person realizes they're being watched. I felt his eyes drop to where I was, not with alarm, no alarm at all, with the patience of someone who'd already known for minutes. "Get up." That was all he said. I rose slowly, both hands holding up the soaked dress so it wouldn't tear in the movement. I sat on the leather seat across from him, still barefoot, the scraped knee oozing blood diluted by rainwater, the veil hanging any old way over a single shoulder. My makeup had collapsed. My lipstick was running. I looked at him without being able to hide it, because I no longer had the strength to hide anything. Augusto Castiglione was exactly what they said, and nothing of what I had imagined. A little under 40, dark suit without a tie, 3 buttons of his shirt open at the chest, dark hair, still damp from the drizzle he'd caught between the hotel and the car, his mouth set in a straight line. His eyes, dark, attentive, in no hurry at all, landed on my face and stayed there, observing, like someone who recognizes a rare animal at the edge of a road and decides, without yet moving a muscle, what he's going to do with it. I should have said something. Apologized. Made up a false name. Lied. I couldn't move my tongue. He looked at me for a moment too long to be polite, and too short to be cruel. His eyes ran over the dress, the knee, the crooked veil, returned to my face. He recognized it. He recognized it. I saw him recognize it. He knew exactly whose daughter I was, exactly where I'd come from, exactly what night this was in the city. I didn't need to say it. "Bellucci," he said. low, as if the word had a taste. I swallowed hard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask questions. He didn't call anyone. He simply leaned forward a little, rested his elbows on his knees, joined his hands in front of his mouth as if he were thinking, and looked at me in a way that emptied the car, the driver, the rain, the city. "You got in here," he asked, in a tone that sounded more like an observation than a question, "because you wanted help, or because you wanted to die?" And it was there, with my knee bleeding and the dress weighing twice as much as my body, that I understood I still didn't know the answer. Chapter 2. The Man My Father Feared. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Augusto didn't move. He stayed with his hands joined in front of his mouth, his elbows on his knees, waiting as if he had all night. Maybe he did. Outside, the rain beat against the glass in a rhythm that didn't keep pace with my heart, faster than the rains, more irregular, more out of control. I began, and the word came out tangled in a knot that had no name. I cleared my throat, and I didn't want to die. Then, I don't know. He kept looking at me. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded filling. It was the kind that weighed, that had its own volume and temperature, that occupied the space between the two of us like a third passenger. "I wanted out," I said, and this time my voice came out firmer than I expected. "I wanted out of my life for one night, and yours was the only car parked there." For a second I thought he was going to laugh. He didn't. His eyes only narrowed a millimeter, as if I'd hit on an answer he hadn't expected me to hit. "Tobiah, sir. Keep driving." "Where to?" "Out of the city." "Yes, sir." The limousine resumed gliding down the avenue. It was still raining. Through the fogged window I saw one of the corners I recognized from childhood pass by, a bench where my father used to leave me waiting with a nanny while he handled quick business. That night, the bench was empty and wet, the black granite seat reflecting the orange light of the lamppost above it. Augusto didn't take his eyes off me for a long stretch of the way. It wasn't an invasive look. It was the look of someone cataloging. The soaked dress, the poorly fastened veil, the bare feet, the blood on the knee that had already begun to dry into a thin, dark crust. He went over each detail with the same calm a doctor would use examining a list of symptoms. "Tobiah," he said again, without turning his head. "A mint." The driver let out a sound that could have been a sigh or a stifled laugh. "Well, now, sir, now." A hand emerged from the little partition window, holding an open tin. Augusto took a mint between his long, calm fingers, and held it out on his palm to me, without leaning too far, like someone offering something to a frightened animal and knowing that sudden movements come at a price. "Take it," he said. "You're not choking, but your chin is trembling." I looked at the mint. I looked at his hand. At the signet ring on his pinky, 2 swords, a small crown engraved in relief. At the firm skin of his knuckles, no visible scars, which somehow frightened me more than if he'd had scars all over. I took the mint. "Thank you," I whispered. "Tobiah, one more." "Why?" "Because she said thank you," Augusto answered, and his voice held a shadow of something that could have been humor if he'd let it reach the surface. "I don't remember the last time anyone said thank you in this car." Tobiah let out a grumble as he passed the second mint through the little window. "It'll be morning before we get there." "It will." "Sir, the lady is barefoot," Tobiah remarked, quietly, in the tone of someone commenting on the weather. "I've got a blanket in the trunk. Pull over." He pulled over. Tobiah stepped out into the rain without complaint, opened the trunk, came back half a minute later with a gray wool blanket folded over his arm. He passed it through the little window. Augusto took it with one hand. He leaned forward, and the smell of the wet suit crossed the air between us for a second. Wood and something colder, drier. He placed the blanket over my shoulders without touching me. A precise, calculated gesture that kept distance where distance was still possible. "Thank you," I repeated. And it was pathetic how shrunken my voice was on that syllable. He didn't answer. He settled back into the opposite seat and looked out the window. The road began to grow darker. The city lights thinned out little by little, replaced by patches of black between lampposts spaced farther and farther apart. Trees appeared. Damp wooden fences appeared. In the distance, a tall gate appeared between 2 moss-covered stone walls. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To a place your father can't enter without permission." "Your house?" "One of the houses." The gate opened without anyone getting out of the car. The gravel crunched thin and steady beneath the tires. I saw ancient trees with trunks wide enough to hide a person, a fountain switched off in the center of a courtyard, a dark stone facade with lit windows in nearly every room. The house was far too big for one person. The limousine stopped before a small staircase. Augusto got out first. He didn't offer me his hand. He waited in the fine rain that was still falling, his suit absorbing the water without him making any move to protect himself, and watched me come down on my own feet, with the blanket over my shoulders and the hem of the dress dragging through the wet gravel. The door of the house opened, before he touched it. "Mio caro, but what time is it?" A woman began, and stopped. 60-something years old, white hair pinned in a tight bun, an apron over a worn blue cotton dress. She saw me. She saw the wedding dress. She saw the bare foot. She saw the knee. She didn't ask a single question. "Come in, bambina," she said, opening the door wider. "Come in before you catch pneumonia on top of everything else." "Donna Marta," said Augusto behind me. "Second floor guest room. Hot towel, whatever she wants to eat. No questions tonight." "Yes, sir. And look at her knee tonight. If it gets worse, we'll call someone tomorrow." "Yes, sir." Donna Marta put her arm around my shoulders as if I were a niece who'd shown up unannounced, and led me through the entrance hall. Augusto hung back, speaking to Tobiah in Italian in a voice so low that not a word crossed the distance between us. In the hall there was an enormous mirror with a gilded frame, taller than me. I looked into it by mistake. The woman standing there wasn't me. My dark hair, which had taken 3 hours to style that afternoon, was running in heavy, plastered strands down both sides of my face. The makeup had turned into dark smears on my cheeks and beneath my eyes, the mascara drawing irregular furrows that ran all the way to my chin. The red lipstick had smudged sideways, as if someone had rubbed it with a thumb to wipe it off and given up. The veil was crooked over one shoulder. The dress, once ivory white, had a gray hem of water and mud, and my eyes, my own eyes, gave me back a look I didn't recognize from any mirror of my previous life. It wasn't the Veronica from the mirror in my mother's room. "Come, Cara." Donna Marta gently pulled me by the arm. "You can look at that mirror later. Right now you're going to look at a bed." We went up. The room was simple for a house that size. A large dark wood bed with white sheets already turned down. A lit fireplace rubbing warmth into the walls with a low, steady crackle. A sash window that looked out over the inner garden. It smelled of cedar and dried lavender. Donna Marta opened the wardrobe, took out a white cotton robe and a folded set of pajamas, and placed them on the chair beside the bed with the same silent efficiency of someone who'd done it many times. "Are these yours?" I asked without thinking. She stopped. She looked at me with a calm that hurt in a specific way, the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's seen too much and learned not to react to any of it. "There's no madam here, Cara. These are mine. I leave them here for when I need to rest between shifts. You wear them tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out other clothes. Thank you. Go take your bath. I'll bring broth." I spent 20 minutes under the hot water. The shower pressure was strong, and the heat rose in thick steam that fogged up the entire stall, blotting out the outlines of everything. I think I cried in the first 5 minutes, but I'm not sure, because the shower confuses things, mixing the water from outside with the water from within. When I came out, in a tied robe with my wet hair running down my back, Donna Marta had left a tray on the nightstand, broth, bread, an apple cut into quarters, and had left without making a sound. I ate half the broth. It was salted just right, with herbs I couldn't name. I went to the window. The inner garden stretched out below my room. It was a square courtyard with a fountain at the center that wasn't running at that hour, 3 benches darkened by damp stone, and a gravel path between low flower beds. The rain had stopped completely. The low light scattered across the ground illuminated just enough to make out shapes without revealing details. And there, on the bench to the left, was Augusto. He'd taken off his jacket and tie. The white shirt clung to his still wet back, outlining his broad shoulders with a precision the dry shirt would never have had. He was on the phone, the device held to his ear with one hand, the other resting on his knee. He was speaking in Italian, in a controlled rhythm, taking short pauses to listen to the answer on the other end. His voice rose once or twice only at the end of a sentence, like a rhetorical question that expected no contradiction. I didn't speak fluent Italian, but I'd been raised by men who spoke Italian when they didn't want me to understand, and so I'd learned enough to catch proper names and heavy words, the ones that carry more weight than the others, the ones that hang in the air after the sentence ends. I heard my father's name, Vittorio Bellucci. Augusto pronounced the name with a coldness that froze the fogged glass of the window in front of my face. Then he said a short sentence, shorter than anything he'd said the whole night. I caught only 3 words of it, but the 3 words were enough for me. "Lui non sa." He doesn't know. And then, quietly, almost to himself, at the very end, and Cora. Yet, I let the curtain fall slowly. I stepped back, then back again. I leaned my back against the wall beside the window and closed my eyes, my heart pounding so loud in my chest that it hurt in my throat. I'd just understood, with the lag of the girl I'd been taught to be, that the man down there wasn't protecting me. Not exactly. Not the way a child imagines being protected, with open arms and no cost at all. He was preparing. I'd walked in, soaked and barefoot and desperate, into the middle of an old war that my father had always feared in silence, and never named aloud in front of me. And the man on the other side of that war had just received, without even looking for it, the one thing still missing from the negotiating table: me. Chapter 3. Coffee with the Enemy. The first thing I learned in that house was the smell of Donna Marta's coffee. I woke before the sun, my body still aching from the night before, the scraped knee hidden beneath a pair of dark sweatpants that appeared folded on the chair in my room, without being asked for, and without a note. I went down the stairs barefoot, gripping the railing as if the hallway could swallow me. The kitchen was lit in low light, warm in a way my own home never was, and the white-haired woman with the hair pinned in a tight bun turned at the sound of me, without any surprise, as if she already knew the exact time I'd appear. "Sit," she said, pointing to the stool at the island. "You still haven't really eaten since you got here." I sat, the smell of toasted bread mixed with melting butter, and for a second I forgot everything outside that wall. Donna Marta placed a large mug in front of me, set a pitcher of hot milk beside it, and pushed the jam jar toward me with her fingertips. The movement had a quiet precision, like someone who cares without asking permission. "Thank you, Donna Marta," I said, quietly, and she stopped. She just stopped, the wooden spoon still in her hand, looking at me as if I'd just said something in a strange language. "You remember my name," she said, her voice firmer than it needed to be. "You told me yesterday, when you handed me the towel." "Yes, but no one usually remembers." I didn't know how to answer that. I lifted the mug to my lips, and that was when I sensed, before seeing, that there was another presence in the kitchen. Augusto was at the back door frame, shoulder leaning against the wood, black trousers, white shirt open at the collar, watching me in exactly the way he'd watched me in the limousine, unhurried, soundless, like someone waiting for the right moment for a sentence. The low light of the kitchen reached only half his face, and the other half stayed in shadow, as if he preferred it that way. "Good morning," I said, not knowing which of them I was addressing. "Good morning," Augusto answered, and crossed the kitchen with long strides, stopped beside the island, accepted the mug Donna Marta offered him as if it were daily choreography. "Donna Marta, could you bring me that folder I left in the library?" She left without answering, and the silence that remained had weight. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Did I? Did you sleep?" "Not much." He nodded, as if he already knew. I curled my fingers around the mug to hide that they were trembling, and he noticed. Of course he noticed, but he didn't comment. Instead, he pushed the jam jar a little closer to me, in a gesture so small I could have ignored it if I hadn't spent my whole life learning to read small gestures. "I don't intend to interrogate you," he said, "but at some point in the next few days, I'm going to need to understand exactly how you ended up at my door." "Not today." "Then what today?" His eyes rose to mine, lingered. There was something in that pause that made me hold my breath without realizing. "Today, coffee." I left the kitchen with the feeling of someone who'd just signed a document without reading it. The days that followed unfolded in a slow rhythm I didn't know. The house had long hallways, with rugs that muffled my steps and a smell of old wood and wax that mixed with the cold morning air. The tall windows looked out over an inner garden, where a very old fig tree stretched its arms against the gray sky. I avoided the outdoor areas. The city out there would be looking for me, and Augusto had made it clear, that first morning, that leaving the perimeter was a decision that needed to be discussed beforehand. It was the first time in my life a rule had come with the word discussed. I'd encounter him in fragments of the day, never on purpose. In the library, turning the page of a book that seemed to fit entirely in his hand. In the office, with a man in a gray suit and the face of a lawyer on the other side of the desk. Renzo, I'd later hear. Papers spread open, low voices that fell silent when I passed. In the inner garden, at dusk, standing with his back to the house, looking at the fig tree like someone greeting an old acquaintance. Every time I saw him like that, from a distance, I stayed still longer than I should have. On one of those afternoons, passing through the hallway that connects the library to the office, I heard the half-open door, and Augusto's voice talking with one of the guards about his wife. He asked for her name. He asked about her mother's surgery. Through the crack, I saw when he wrote something on a small sheet of paper and sent the man back to the hallway with a nod of the head that was more respect than order. I hadn't expected that, nor had I expected to find, on the morning of the third day, a copy of the book I'd mentioned in passing, the night before sitting on the library's little table, marked with a narrow ribbon at the page where I'd stopped quoting the story. Was it you? Augusto, seated in the leather armchair in the corner, looked up from the newspaper without answering. Was it you who put the book here? It was Donna Marta. Donna Marta knows what page I stopped on. He turned the page of the newspaper. He almost smiled. He didn't quite smile, but the corner of his lip moved a millimeter, and I saw it. Donna Marta is very attentive, he said. Bianca arrived on Thursday, 5 days after the night of the rain, and the house trembled in a different way. Tobiah warned Augusto beforehand. Of course, nothing came through that gate without warning, and I'd asked quietly, almost shrinking, if I could receive a single friend, one person, someone whose voice I needed to hear. Augusto thought for 3 seconds and said one word. Bianca. I didn't even ask how he knew. She appeared in the late afternoon, with an enormous bouquet of white lilies mixed with peonies from her own flower shop, the stems wrapped in craft paper tied with twine, and her red lipstick impeccable despite the trip. She stopped in the middle of the hall, looking up at the high ceiling like someone appraising the price per square foot. I brought flowers, she announced, for the funeral of the wedding. Bianca. What? It's true. The man died socially, darling. Tobiah, who had walked her from the gate to the entrance, held the bouquet with the face of someone who'd never touched a lily in his life. Ma'am, he said, formal, you can accompany Miss Bellucci. Miss Bellucci. Bianca arched her eyebrows at me, delighted by the formality. 1,000 times better than Mrs. Valerie, isn't it? I laughed for the first time in days. It was a strange sound, rusty, that came out of my throat like someone relearning. I took her to the inner garden. The air outside was cold, with that smell of damp earth that comes before a rain that hasn't yet decided to fall. We sat on the stone bench beneath the fig tree, and I told her what I could. The dress, the rain, the heel, the crest on the limousine door. Bianca didn't interrupt a single time, which was, in itself, a miracle. When I finished, she stayed silent for a length of time, disproportionate to her body, and then she took my hand. V, she said, her voice graver than I'd ever known it. Do you have any idea what kind of house you're in? I do. Do you have any idea what kind of man signs the crest on that gate? I do. Are you afraid? I thought. I really thought, looking at the fig tree and at the yellow light leaking through the library windows inside. Not the way I should be. Bianca looked at the house, then at me, and for a second I thought she was going to tell me to leave with her right then, but she only squeezed my hand harder and sighed. Then we keep our eyes open. I'll keep an eye on you. You keep an eye on him. And may God keep an eye on all of us. That same night, the city reached the house for the first time. I was in the library, sitting on the rug, my legs folded beneath my body, pretending to read. The smell of old paper and the leather of the armchair filled the room. The door opened without a knock. Augusto walked in with his phone in hand, held it to his ear, and his expression hardened 3 seconds later. Vittorio, he said. My father's name cut through the air like glass. I went still. Augusto didn't tell me to leave, and for a moment I understood that he wanted me to listen. He walked to the window, stood with his back to me, and his Italian came out low, slow, without any change in tone. I didn't understand all of it. I understood the essential. I understood when he said no. I understood when he said my house. I understood, above all, when he said a single sentence in English, near the end, in the gravest voice I'd ever heard come out of that man. She is no longer yours to demand. And he hung up. The silence that followed had no beginning and no end. Augusto put the phone in his pocket, and when he turned to me, I was standing without having realized at what moment I'd risen. What did he say? I asked. What was expected? Is he going to come here? Not today. And Olindo. His pause was 1.5 seconds long. I counted. Olindo is in the city, Augusto said, finally. Been hunting. I sat back down on the rug, because my knees wouldn't obey the order to keep standing. Augusto crossed the library slowly, sat in the armchair across from me, and for a moment I thought he was going to lean in to touch my face. He didn't. He clasped his hands between his knees and stared at the floor between the two of us, where the rug had a burgundy pattern I'd never noticed. My sister, he said without warning, was 20 years old. I held my breath. And she was handed over into a marriage like the one they tried to force on you. Not exactly the same, but similar. Augusto. I arrived late. His voice was firm, but something in it had cracked at a point I couldn't locate. I'm telling you this because you need to know why this house is safe. I already know. He raised his eyes to me, and I saw, for the first time, what existed behind his coldness. It wasn't absence. It was a wound so old, it had learned to resemble stone. I wanted to say something. I said nothing. I held out my hand, left it open between the two of us, at the level of the rug, without lifting it, without calling, just there, available. He looked at my hand for a length of time too long. Then he touched 2 fingers to mine, lightly, like someone testing whether the temperature burns. It didn't burn. It was at that exact moment that Tobiah opened the library door. "Boss," he said, and his voice was without humor for the first time since I'd known him. "Phone. Confirmed." Augusto rose in a single motion. The air in the library changed temperature so fast that I felt my body tremble before understanding why. Tobiah entered, handed over the device, and glanced at me, not with pity, with warning. "What?" I asked. Augusto answered, listened, hung up. He put the phone in the inner pocket of his jacket with studied calm. When he turned to me, his eyes were different. "Olindo found out the route," he said. "He knows we're transferring you to the second safe house on Saturday. He knows the road. He knows the time. How? That's what I'm going to find out." "Augusto." He walked over to me, stopped a step away, and for the first time truly touched me, his hand on my elbow, firm, unhurried, without asking. The heat of that pressure crossed the fabric of the sleeve as if there were nothing between us. "You're not going alone," he said. "I'm going with you." And in his expression there was a promise no one in my life had ever made before. Chapter 4. The Cabin and the Silence That Came Before. Between the night Tobiah walked into the library with that phone and the following Saturday morning, 2 whole days of a strange calm passed. Augusto locked in the office with Renzo, Tobiah coming and going every few hours, maps spread across the desk that I saw through a crack in the door. No one explained anything aloud, but everyone knew what was being prepared. I woke on Saturday to the smell of rain coming through the gap in the window. It hadn't rained during the night, but Philadelphia's heavy air carried the promise, and I'd already learned, in a week in that house, that the gray skies made good on their threats without warning. Donna Marta appeared at the bedroom door with a black outfit folded over her arm, trousers, a long-sleeved blouse, a discreet leather jacket, clothes meant for running, if necessary. She laid them on the wooden chair without saying anything beyond what was needed, and I understood that the morning would be one of those when silence had weight. "You told me not to wear perfume today," she remarked, with her usual calm. Was that Augusto's request? It was. I dressed in silence. I went down the stairs and found Augusto in the hall, beside Tobiah. He was dressed all in dark, too, his shirt buttoned to the last button, and there was a serenity on his face that unsettled me more than any show of tension would have. There was something deliberate in that calm, as if he built it from the inside out every morning, and today had raised the walls earlier than usual. He looked me up and down, checked the jacket, nodded once to himself. "You'll be in the back seat," he said. "Ma with me. And Tobiah?" "I'll drive," Tobiah answered, adjusting his perpetually rumpled jacket. "And with your permission, ma'am. Promise not to shoot anyone before me. I don't have a gun, Tobiah. Yet," he murmured, and offered a mint in the most natural movement in the world. I took it. The armored car was different from the limousine, smaller, more discreet, with windows so dark that the world outside seemed recorded in an old black-and-white film, the entire city reduced to shadows and outlines. Augusto sat beside me, and his thigh touched mine without ceremony, without apology, with a naturalness I still didn't know how to read. His warmth crossed the fabric. I didn't pull away. We went out through the gate in a careful silence. The back road unwound between bare trees, leafless branches drawing bars against the lead-colored sky. Tobiah commented on the non-existent traffic, as if there were a whole city of reckless drivers right there inside the car with us, a way of filling the silence without admitting that the silence was too heavy to be left alone. Augusto didn't respond. His fingers rested on his thigh, without visible tension, but I saw it. I saw that his right hand was too close to his jacket, and that the jacket hung heavy on one side. "How long?" I asked. 40 minutes, Tobiah said. "God willing and the asphalt cooperating." God wasn't willing. The first thing I heard was the sound of glass shattering in the empty passenger seat, a dry crack that my brain took a full second to identify. And before I processed the word gunshot, Augusto had already pushed me down, one hand firm on the back of my neck, bending my body to the floor of the car. "Don't get up," he said. "Augusto. Don't get up, Veronica." Tobias shouted something I couldn't decipher, and the car swerved left with such violence that my head hit Augusto's knee. I heard gunshots. 2, 3, more. I couldn't count. I heard Tobias curse in Italian. I heard Augusto's breathing near my ear, steady, unaltered, and that was the most terrifying thing of all, that a man could breathe like that while the world fell apart outside. The car stopped suddenly. Tobias opened the driver's door. "Get out on her side, boss. Now, I'll cover you." How many? 5 that I saw. There must be more. Augusto opened the door on my side, gripped my wrist with a force that didn't hurt but didn't negotiate, and pulled me out. We ran. I'd never run like that. My legs obeyed, but my whole body screamed that it wasn't possible, that I should be lying in the church pew with Olindo looking at me like property. And instead I was running through the woods behind a man who held my hand as if it were the only thing that mattered in the entire state of Pennsylvania. The branches scratched my hands. The uneven ground beneath my feet didn't forgive stumbles, and Augusto pulled me up before I could fall, anticipating every time, as if he'd run through these woods before, and knew where the ground lied. Tobias fired 3 times behind us. At some point, he stopped firing. At some point, he stopped being heard. Augusto didn't look back. We ran for an eternity that was probably 15 minutes. The branches tugged at the jacket with every step, and Augusto freed it with dry yanks without slowing down. When he finally stopped, it was in front of a low structure of dark wood, half swallowed by the vegetation, with the door crooked on its hinge, and the roof sunken in one corner, like something that had carried too much weight for years. "Here," he said. We went in. The cabin smelled of old wood and something older I couldn't name. Damp earth, maybe, or the silent accumulation of many winters spent with no one inside to light a fire. Augusto shut the door behind us and pushed an old bench against it, holding the latch with the weight of the furniture. Then he walked to the only window, looked through the narrow gap for a few seconds, came back. The only piece of furniture left was another bench of darkened wood leaning against the back wall, and a shelf with forgotten objects covered in dust. The light coming in was gray and weak, enough only to outline shapes. He took off his jacket, still in silence, and that was the moment I saw the blood. "Augusto, it's not mine. It's on your arm." He looked down, at the long cut crossing his right forearm, and frowned like someone discovering a coffee stain on an expensive shirt. "That one's mine," he conceded. "But it's shallow. Sit, Veronica, sit." He looked at me for one long second, with those eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. The cabin, the situation, the probability I'd give in. And then, to my surprise, he obeyed. He sat on the bench, leaned his back against the dark wood wall, and held out his arm with an almost amused resignation, like someone accepting the orders of a particularly stubborn child. The cabin had a small cabinet with forgotten utensils, a folded cloth that looked clean enough, a closed bottle of something that smelled of alcohol when I opened the cap. I poured it over the fabric, knelt in front of him, and brought my hand to his arm. It was trembling. My hand was trembling. Not his. "Sorry," I whispered. "For what?" "For trembling." He tilted his head, and the low light coming through the gaps in the window struck half his face in a way I hadn't expected. It drew his jaw with precision, marked the shadow of his lashes, made his eyes darker than they already were. He didn't look like a monster in the gray light of an abandoned cabin. He looked like just a man who'd carried heavy things for too long. "Now, are you still trembling from fear?" he asked. "I don't know." I cleaned the cut with slow movements. He didn't move. When I passed the cloth over the deepest part, his breathing changed. Not much, just enough for me to notice, and the fact that I'd noticed made my own breathing forget the way back. "There," I said, quietly. I didn't get up. Augusto didn't move either. We stayed there, me on my knees, him sitting, my face at the level of his chest, and for a moment that lasted longer than any other moment of my life. Neither of us breathed properly. "My sister," he said suddenly, in the lowest voice he'd ever used with me. Her name was Greta. I looked up. She was 20 years old. She laughed a lot. She laughed at things no one understood, and when we asked what she was laughing at, she said she was laughing in anticipation, just in case something funny happened later. Augusto. I arrived 2 days late. His throat hardened on that last word, but his voice didn't break. I rested my palm on his knee without thinking, and he covered my hand with his. His hands were warm, rough in places, and firm the way certain things can only be firm after they've been broken and reassembled with great awareness of each piece. "I won't arrive late again," he said. "I know. You don't know. But you will." I raised my face. He tilted his. It was like that, without choreography, without music, without anyone watching beyond the walls of a forgotten cabin in the middle of cold Pennsylvania woods. His lips found mine with a calm that contradicted everything I expected from a man like that. And the first thing I thought was that nothing I'd lived before counted now. Nothing I'd lived up to that moment had prepared me for the way he stayed still, waiting for me to decide how close I wanted to be. It was slow, unhurried. His fingers rose up my face, found my temple, and stayed there, anchored, like someone holding something precious for the first time, and not yet trusting their own strength. When I pulled back to breathe, he leaned his forehead against mine and stayed there. The air between us was the warmest in the whole cabin. "Veronica," he said. I shouldn't have done that yet. Why? Because now there's no going back. I smiled. I smiled small. I smiled trembling. But I smiled. I didn't come here to go back. Tobiah arrived before dawn, with 3 men and a decent bandage. The cabin gained flashlight light, and the darkness retreated to the corners with a lazy resistance. Tobiah's dry talk filled the space, remarking that a jacket with another man's blood was worse than a rumpled jacket, and Augusto almost laughed. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a millimeter, and then decided not to compromise his reputation. I, sitting on the edge of the bench with his jacket over my shoulders, watched the silent ritual of the 3 men organizing the extraction, as if they were folding a tablecloth after a quiet dinner. "Can you handle the road, ma'am?" Tobiah asked. "I can. There's another car 3 kilometers from here. On foot. Boss, let's go." Before leaving the cabin, Augusto took an old leather folder from atop a shelf I hadn't noticed among the shadows. He shook off the dust, which fell in a slow cloud through the beam of the flashlight, opened it quickly, checked the contents, closed it again. He tucked it under his arm with the same naturalness with which he'd have tucked away a newspaper. "What's that?" I asked. "I've used this cabin as a blind spot for years. Renzo sent recent material here last month, when we started gathering things on Valerie. I came to see it with my own eyes. Important." He didn't answer right away. We walked through the woods in single file, the men ahead with low flashlights, Tobiah behind, Augusto beside me. The woods at night were different from the woods we'd crossed running, quieter, with sounds that arrived from far away, and arrived soft, without threat. Augusto's breathing beside me was regular. I paid attention to it without meaning to. When we reached the second car, he finally opened the folder on the seat, separated 3 sheets from the top, and held one out to me with the calm of someone handing over a sentence already signed. I took the sheet. I focused on the typewritten letters. It was a list, columns of names, amounts, dates, with margins annotated by hand in a small and slanted script, a record of debts, with a familiar signature at the bottom. The signature was Olindo's. I recognized the name in the middle of the list before recognizing anything else. It was a name I'd been paying in silence for 4 years. It was one of 3 women I supported, hidden from my family. One of the 3 who depended on money I took from my own allowance, so she wouldn't go back to living with the man who'd tried to kill her twice. And there she was, listed as a debt, signed by Olindo. "Augusto," I whispered. He was looking at me. He waited. "I know this name." The car started up. The trees began to file past outside, dark and shapeless. I looked at the sheet, at the handwriting I knew from my childhood, at the signature of the man I should have been sleeping with that night in a hotel suite in Philadelphia, and I understood, with a coldness I didn't know I possessed, that the worst day of my life still hadn't been the one when they'd tried to marry me off. The worst day of my life was beginning now. Chapter 5. The name inside the folder. The folder stayed on my lap throughout the trip to the second safe house. Augusto's fingers rested beside my knee, without touching, and even so I felt the weight of his hand as if it were on my skin, a warmth that had no concrete origin but was impossible to ignore. Tobiah drove in silence, his shoulder a little stiff from the effort of the night before, and the Philadelphia sky opened slowly into a gray of forgotten rain. The street still held the dampness of the night, and the car cut through that dim light with the low growl of the engine, uniform and almost soothing if I could let myself be fooled by it. I couldn't. I looked at the name written on the list of debts, Marianne Sutton. I knew that name by heart. I kept it in a blue-covered notebook that I kept locked in the desk of my old room, along with the receipts for the transfers made in parts, under different names, so that no one could trace them. It was her, one of the three I supported in silence. A small town in the Pennsylvania countryside, 2 daughters, a deep scar at the corner of her mouth that she'd never explained, and that I'd already learned not to ask about. "You've gone pale," Augusto said, without turning his face. "I know one of these women." He turned then, slowly, as if he wanted to be sure of what he was about to see. His gaze dropped to the folder, rose to my face, and stopped at my eyes for an instant too long to be casual. "How do you know her?" "I sent her money 2 years ago." Tobiah, in the front seat, said nothing. He only adjusted the rearview mirror in a way that made me understand he'd heard everything and was processing it in silence, in the discreet way that seemed to be that man's native tongue. Augusto leaned his head back against the seat and closed his eyes for 2 seconds. When he opened them, there was something different in them, something that seemed like anger, held back with such force that it had turned into calm. "So you were already his enemy before you even knew it." It wasn't a question. It was a statement said with the same sobriety with which one states a geographic fact, and for that reason it weighed more than any accusation would have. The Castiglione country house was smaller than the isolated property, but it had the same feeling of a fortress disguised as a home. Low roof, dark stone, narrow windows that let in the light as if it were a favor. The fireplace was already lit before our arrival, and the smell of burning wood greeted me on the threshold, like a memory of a place I'd never been. Donna Marta wasn't there. It was a new housekeeper, a woman of few words and precise gestures, who only handed me a clean robe and a pair of thick socks and said her own name at the end of the introduction, like someone offering a key and not needing to explain which door it serves. I spent the whole afternoon in the smaller library, bent over the folder. The fireplace crackled 2 meters from me, and the warmth came in irregular waves, sometimes too hot, sometimes not enough. Augusto came in 3 times. The first, he left a cup of tea at the edge of the table without saying anything. The cup was still steaming when he left, and I looked at it for a long time before deciding I could trust that small gesture. The second, he adjusted the firewood with short, mechanical movements, his back to me, without turning around even once. The third, he stopped behind me, rested both hands on the back of my chair, and read over my shoulder. His breath was close to the back of my neck. His smell, wood, clean fabric, something that had no name but that I was already beginning to recognize, filled the small space between us. I couldn't turn the page. "How many cases?" he asked. "At least 3 documented. Probably more. Dates. The oldest are 5 years old. The most recent, from a few months ago." He pulled away slowly. The warmth that had been at my back left with him, and left a void I hadn't expected to feel. And that irritated me a little, to recognize it, because it meant I'd already grown used to a presence that 2 months ago I'd have called a threat. "Renzo arrives in an hour," Augusto said, already at the threshold. "I want you in the meeting." "Me." I lifted my face. "You found it. You decide what to do." Renzo Marchetti arrived in a gray suit, folder under his arm, smelling of old tobacco and late afternoon rain. He had the face of someone past 50 who'd seen contracts broken and redrawn so many times that nothing surprised him anymore. He greeted me with a slight nod and sat in the armchair across from mine without waiting for an invitation. It was the manner of a man who'd entered that house hundreds of times and knew exactly where each armchair was, even in the dark. Augusto poured 3 small measures of an amber liquid. I didn't touch mine. "Summary," Renzo said, opening the folder on the coffee table with an almost surgical precision. "Systematic extortion, threats with witness records, 3 documented episodes of physical violence with photographs. Olindo Valeri's signature is on 14 pages. It's enough for a long conviction." "And for us?" I asked. Renzo raised his gaze. He seemed surprised that I'd spoken, not in an offended way, but in the manner of someone recalibrating an expectation in real time. "And if we hand it over directly, the police are going to want to know how the material reached our hands. They'll get to Augusto before they get to Olindo." "Anonymous delivery," Augusto said. "Envelope without fingerprints, source impossible to trace. Copy to the press the same day." Renzo tapped lightly on the dossier, slowly, like someone confirming an equation. "It works, but it needs clean hands to prepare it." "I'll prepare it," I said. The 2 men looked at me at the same time. Renzo arched an eyebrow, discreet. Augusto didn't move. He just looked at me with that attention that seemed to weigh something in silence, unhurried and without visible judgment. "Are you sure?" It was the name of one of my women that appeared in this folder. I'm the one who delivers it. Augusto held my gaze for a length of time that seemed measured with a ruler. Then he did something I didn't expect. He leaned forward slightly, rested his elbows on his knees, and said, in a low voice, without ceremony, "All right." It was 2 syllables, but I understood their weight. It was the first clear sign that he was ceding control, and that he did so knowing very well what he was ceding. Renzo noticed too. I saw it from the small movement of his mouth, almost a smile, that he swallowed before turning the next page. That night, Tobiah leaned against the doorframe with the phone in his hand, and that false serenity on his face that I was beginning to recognize as a code for emergency. "Boss." Augusto rose from the armchair with no apparent hurry, the glass still in his hand. "Olindo found out," Tobiah said. "He knows the lady is here. Cars leaving Philadelphia now. 3 at least. Estimated arrival. Before dawn." I gripped the edge of the table. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. Augusto's expression didn't change. He just set the glass down with a dry click on the wood and asked, in the same voice with which he'd have asked the time, "How many of our men available?" 8, plus me. "Enough. Position them by the gravel pit. Cover the entrance to the woods. I want him alive." Tobiah tilted his head and left. Augusto turned to me. The firelight crossed half his face and left the other in shadow, and for an instant he looked exactly like what everyone said he was. Relentless, built for situations where any normal person would crumble. "Go to your room," he said. "No, Veronica. I'm not going to stay behind a door while you decide the rest of my life in the backyard." He walked toward me, slowly, the way he always did, as if each step were a complete sentence, and he wanted me to have time to read each one. He stopped in front of me, too close, close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from him through the dark fabric of his shirt. His hand found my face with that same calm I'd already felt in the cabin. Warm palm, thumb at my temples, fingers descending slowly to my chin, as if he were verifying that I was real. "You're not going to stay behind a door," he said. "You're going to stay alive. There's a difference. Promise you'll come back." He didn't answer right away. His eyes ran over my whole face, side to side, top to bottom, like someone memorizing a map, before setting out into a territory with no return. "I don't promise anything," he said, finally, "but I'll come back." He leaned in. It wasn't a goodbye kiss. It was a kiss that fit between 2 wars. Short, deep, without choreography, with his mouth resting afterward against my forehead, like someone signing beneath a sentence written centuries ago that only now had someone found the courage to read aloud. The phone rang in the living room before I could respond to what that had done inside my chest. It was an unknown number. Augusto made a gesture and I answered. "V?" Bianca's voice came from the other end, low, without her usual humor, with that particular texture she only had when she was awake in the middle of the night, worried about something she couldn't name. "Are you there?" "I'm here. I don't know what's going on, but I dreamed about you. I dreamed you were crying inside a marble kitchen. I just woke up and called." I swallowed hard. I didn't answer immediately. This house's kitchen had light-colored stone counters. It wasn't marble, but it was close enough to stop me. And it was exactly there, with the phone at my ear and Olindo's folder on the table 2 meters from me, hearing the voice of the only person left from my previous life with no condition attached to her affection, that I cried for the first time without it being from fear. It was a short, contained cry, more relief than pain. The kind of cry that doesn't ask permission and doesn't warn you before it comes. "V, I'm here," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." "Are you really going to call?" "I swear." I hung up. Augusto was at the doorway, watching. He didn't ask a question, didn't step forward, didn't say anything that could turn that moment into something I'd need to explain. He just held out his hand. I went. The whole house had changed temperature. Augusto's men positioned themselves in silence throughout the rooms, shadows that moved fast and soundlessly, as if they'd been trained to occupy space without existing, and the only conversation that still existed was that of the wind beating against the narrow windows. Tobiah handed me a small flashlight and said, with that dry humor only he knew how to summon at the exact moment when I most needed something that wasn't pure tension, "If the lights go out, ma'am, don't run. The floor of this house bites." I almost laughed. Almost. Augusto led me to a room at the back, a small office, double wall, a single tall window that let in only a narrow strip of dark sky. He locked the door from the inside and handed me the key with the same seriousness with which he'd have handed over a weapon. "You open it only for me or for Tobiah." And if neither of you comes back, he stopped. He leaned his forehead against mine for a second, a whole second, with the real weight of his head, with the heat of his skin, with breathing that was more controlled than it should have been for a man about to face 3 carloads of enemies in a gravel yard. Then you listen for the voice through the door before you open it. You learn to doubt everything, including me. I already have. He left. The door shut. The silence inside that office was trapped, compressed between the double walls, and it weighed in a different way from the silence of the cabin or the silence of the car. It was the silence of someone waiting without knowing which would arrive first, the answer or the noise. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and Olindo's folder on my knees and the key clenched in my palm, and I counted my breathing so I wouldn't go mad. It was at that moment that the headlights appeared. I saw them through the tall window, standing on tiptoe, my chin almost at the edge of the frame, 3 pairs of yellow lights cutting through the darkness of the gravel road. Still far off, still slow, still pretending they weren't in a hurry. They raised a fine dust that glittered in their own headlights, as if it were dirty snow. Beautiful in a wrong way. The way certain dangerous things are beautiful when you're still on the inside of the glass. For the first time in my life, I didn't pray to be saved. I prayed to be useful. Chapter 6. The Choice No One Expected. The headlights stopped about 50 meters from the house. The car doors opened almost at the same time, and I heard low voices on the gravel, the sound of boots arriving with deliberately short, calculated steps, and the dry click I already recognized as the cocking of a gun. I pressed my temple against the cold glass and counted 6 silhouettes, then 8. The glass was damp with condensation, and the night's chill crossed the window frame in invisible threads that touched my face. The first shot came from inside the woods, not from the porch. It was a single shot, short, calculated, and I understood at once that Tobiah had started from the flank, exactly as Augusto had said he would. Then came the others, in short bursts, interspersed with silences more terrifying than the noise itself. I couldn't see Augusto. I could, however, feel where he was, as if there were an invisible thread between the two of us, stretched through the darkness, taut and warmed by the weight of everything that had happened in the last few weeks. The confrontation lasted less time than I expected. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 15. Time lost its size, as it always loses when fear takes over the body and turns it into something that only waits. I heard the first shouts outside, men shifting positions, short orders in Italian I couldn't decipher. A burst near the window made me lie face down over Olindo's folder, hugging the paper as if it were a shield. Then a long silence, then 2 more shots, more distant, then the unmistakable sound of someone being dragged across the gravel, and Tobiah's voice shouting a single word I didn't understand but recognized as victory. When the last shot fell silent, I stayed motionless on the floor until I heard 3 paced knocks at the door, the agreed rhythm, slow enough not to frighten. "It's me," said Augusto's voice. I turned the key with a trembling hand and pushed the door open with my shoulder, because my knees still didn't trust their own strength. He came in with his shirt torn at the sleeve, a thin cut on his eyebrow that bled slowly and had already started to close, and no gunshot wounds on his body. Behind him, Tobiah carried his shoulder injured again, but with a sideways smile I'd never seen on him, the kind of smile that men accustomed to wars reserve for the nights when they walk out of them. "Olindo?" I asked. "Alive," Augusto said, handcuffed on the garage floor, waiting for the right time. Renzo appeared at the door with the envelope in his hands, his face wearing the quiet expression of someone who'd worked all night without needing recognition. He'd stayed in the house's makeshift office, assembling the material for the anonymous delivery under the yellow light of a metal lamp, the evidence, the photographs, the sheets with Olindo's signature on 3 distinct documents. Everything organized in a package with no return address and no fingerprints, folded with an almost surgical precision. "Delivery at dawn," Renzo said. "We already have the courier." "The press too," Augusto said. "Simultaneous copy. 3 newspapers." The envelope left the house at 5 in the morning, carried by someone whose name I'd never know. Olindo left at 6 inside a squad car that stopped on the gravel road without anyone needing to call, as if the whole night had already stitched together the path to that moment. There was no scene. There was no shouting. Just 2 police officers, a blue car with its lights off, and Augusto's elegant silence watching from the window while the man who had tried to destroy me was led away handcuffed, barefoot, without the ring on his finger, and without a single word of defense. I stood beside Augusto, my hand resting on the cold doorframe. and thought that maybe justice too could be a silent thing, discreet, like the dawn behind the trees. My father arrived at 8. I saw him through the same window. Vittorio Bellucci got out of the car in the black coat he always wore at funerals, the double-breasted one I'd associated since childhood with wakes and irreversible decisions, and climbed the porch steps without looking at Augusto's men who opened the way. He didn't knock on the door. He pushed it. I went down the stairs slowly. Augusto was at the foot of the staircase, and made as if to step forward, but I rested my hand lightly on his chest. He understood. He took a step back without saying anything, and I felt the exact weight of that gesture. A man who could take control of any room, choosing Aid instead to give me the space. My father looked at me from where he stood. He had a tired face and eyes exactly like the ones I remembered from childhood. Dark, calculating, used to seeing people as pieces on a board. Except that, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. "Veronica," he said, "you're coming with me." "No. Our family doesn't tolerate this kind of scandal." "Your family," I said, "was never mine." He hardened his jaw. He looked at Augusto over my shoulder with that expression the men of the organization used when they wanted to measure the size of an enemy. Augusto said nothing. He didn't need to. He was there, motionless, with that presence that needed no words to occupy every inch of the room. "I'm your father. You're the man who sold me to a criminal because of a deal. I owe you nothing of this. You'll regret it, maybe. But I'd rather regret a choice of my own than an imposition of yours." He stood still for a few more seconds. He searched for something in my face, maybe the usual fear, maybe the girl who still didn't know how to say no, and found neither. His jaw trembled once, almost imperceptibly, before hardening again. "You know what's going to happen to the family business." "I know. And even so, he stared at me for the last time. It wasn't hatred that was there. It was worse. It was the silent calculation of a man understanding that he'd lost a piece worth more than he'd admitted his whole life. He turned. He crossed the porch with the same measured steps with which he'd entered. He got into the car, and he left without slamming the door, which stayed only ajar with a soft click, a polite silence that was the trademark of the house I'd grown up in. I stayed on the threshold until the car disappeared around the bend of the gravel road, until the last rumble of the engine dissolved among the trees. Augusto leaned against my back slowly, without weight, just so I'd know he was there. "You trembled," he said, close to my ear. "Only afterward." The news arrived in the late afternoon. Olindo Valeri, arrested. The press in an uproar. The photographs circulating in every newspaper, black and white and merciless. Commentators speaking of scandal. The Bellucci name being dragged in lightly at the bottom of the columns. Only lightly, because Renzo had done his job with his usual precision, cutting out what needed to appear and protecting what needed to stay in the shadows. Bianca called. She laughed at me for 10 minutes. She cried for 2. She insisted on ordering food, because today, according to her, was officially the day for me not to cook or think about any man. The house emptied at nightfall with an almost ceremonial slowness. Renzo left with the empty folder under his arm. Tobias changed the bandage on his shoulder with the indifference of someone who'd lost count of the times he'd done it, and stayed in the guardhouse with an old book and a mint in his mouth. The new housekeeper turned off the kitchen lights, set 2 plates on the table, and left through the back hallway without making a sound. The 2 of us remained. Augusto was in the office when I came in. The metal lamp was still lit on the desk, casting a circle of yellow light over the dark top. There was nothing left to decide, no envelope to prepare, nor an attack position to review. The whole house breathed slowly for the first time since I'd set foot in it. He looked at me from the armchair. "And now?" "Now I don't know," I said, standing at the door with my hand on the frame. "But I know where I want to sleep." He rose. He came to me slowly, with that quiet gait that didn't announce arrival, only arrived. He passed his hand over my waist unhurriedly, and the other rose to my face with that calm that was his trademark, warm palm against my cheek, thumb near the corner of my lips, eyes descending from my eyes to my mouth, and returning with a slowness that was, in itself, a declaration. We walked together down the dark wood hallway, me in front, him behind, his hand brushing lightly against my wrist like someone guiding without holding, like someone respecting another's pace without giving up the direction. At the threshold of the bedroom, he stopped. He leaned his forehead against mine, and I felt his warmth radiating against my skin, the smell of burning wood and cold night that was on him at that hour. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, low. "I already changed my mind once in my life. It was when I got into your limousine. I won't change it again. He kissed me, slowly, without choreography, with the kind of hunger that fits entirely within respect and the accumulated waiting of weeks. The door shut behind us. The morning light came into the kitchen in a way I'd never seen before, maybe because I'd never seen the kitchen at that hour, with the sun still low and oblique, striking the exposed brick wall and leaving golden stripes that crossed the stone floor. Maybe because I'd never had time to notice anything, too busy surviving to observe the world around me with this new calm I was still learning to recognize as my own. I was wearing his robe, too big for me, gray, smelling of cedar and old soap. The sleeves folded over twice so they wouldn't cover my hands. The new housekeeper had set out the coffee and 2 plates on the table before going out to the yard, and the silence of the kitchen was the kind that asks nothing, that simply exists there around you like an environment that finally coincides with the person you're trying to be. Augusto leaned against the doorframe. I felt him before turning. His presence had a specific weight in the air, a discreet gravity I already knew well enough to recognize with my back to him. He was in black trousers, white shirt open at the first buttons, barefoot on the cold floor. His eyes had something I didn't know, a half smile. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there, at the left corner of his mouth, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in a long time. Good morning. Good morning. He came up behind me with that ever-silent gait. He rested his chin on my shoulder with a familiarity that should have surprised me and didn't. His hands found mine on the handle of the mug, large and warm against my fingers, and stayed there without squeezing, just present. The phone vibrated on the counter. Bianca. Answer, he said, quietly, in my ear. I answered. So, she began, without greeting, as she always did when she had too much curiosity to waste time on formality. How was the first official night out of captivity? I laughed. It was a clean, surprised laugh that came out before I could contain it, the kind of laugh I no longer remembered the last time I'd given. Augusto smiled against my hair. Bianca, I'm asking as a friend concerned about your emotional, social, and physiological well-being. You're insufferable. I know. That's why you love me. I hung up laughing. Augusto stayed there, behind me, his arms now crossed lightly over the front of my body, his chin resting in the curve of my neck while the coffee cooled in the 2 untouched plates. And it was then that it happened. It was so small that I almost let it slip by. A thought crossed my mind for just half a second. It was strange that a thing could seem like this. So right, so fast, so much like something that won't last. It was the old voice of the girl who'd learned to distrust anything too good, who'd grown up understanding that peace always preceded a trap. I closed my eyes. I breathed in the cedar smell of the robe and the coffee, and the soft cold of the morning coming through the half-open window. I pushed the thought away like someone brushing dust from the air, not with violence, just with the awareness that it existed and that I no longer needed to let it occupy the whole space. I squeezed his hand over mine. He squeezed back. Outside, the sun finished rising over the trees, and the whole house, for the first time in many years, simply breathed. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee. I thought I was finally safe. I had a new life, a purpose that made my heart beat with pride, the foundation I built from scratch. And Augusto, the most dangerous man in Philadelphia, looked at me as if I were the only thing capable of taming his darkness. Then she appeared. Lucilla, sweet as poisoned honey, too generous, too perfect to be true. I embraced her. I opened the doors of my home. I brought her into the foundation, introduced her to my allies, trusted her with secrets that not even Augusto knew in full. I let her see the smile he reserved only for me, and she smiled back. 3 days later, Augusto disappeared. At the intersection of Broad and South, his phone was found on the asphalt, cracked screen, a thin crack that cut across the photo of us in the background like a stab. The last record, a message of mine he never answered. Blood on the sidewalk. No body. The woman I called a friend had come in through the door I opened myself. The trap that destroyed my happiness used my own hands to set itself. Now I sit here, looking at the destroyed phone on the table, the silence of the house that once echoed his voice. Is the man who swore to protect me still breathing? Or has Lucilla already torn from him what mattered most? Us? And what if her scheme is far greater than the disappearance? What if what she planned to crack the couple is something not even his love can mend? And what if, when he comes back, if he comes back, I discover that the betrayal was already inside the two of us? What do I do now, when the only person who could save me might already be lost forever?